I will now introduce Diamyd Medical. So we will now hear about precision medicine for autoimmune diseases or autoimmune diabetes. And we'll hear from Ulf Hannelius, Karin Rosen, and Jonny Ludvigsson. And I would like to say a few words. Karin Rosen is an accomplished life sciences executive and physician with 2 decades of experience in the biotechnology industry. She has held senior leadership positions at several global companies, including GlaxoSmithKline, Immune Therapeutics, Genentech, and Horizon Therapeutics. Dr. Rosen has an impressive track record in developing and launching novel therapeutics with expertise in clinical research and development, as well as regulatory filing strategies, which is, of course, also very important. She holds experience in developing phase 2 to 3 clinical programs for multiple biologics, including the areas of immunology. As an adjunct member of the Diamyd Medical Board of Directors, she brings her extensive experience in global clinical development and US and global medical affairs, making her a valuable addition to the board and the company. We will also hear from Ulf Hannelius. And born in 1975, Ulf Hannelius earned his master's degree in biochemistry from the University of Helsinki in Finland, and his PhD in molecular biology from Karolinska Institutet in Stockholm, Sweden. In parallel to his postdoctoral research in cancer genomics at the Karolinska Institutet, he completed an executive MBA at the Stockholm School of Economics and went on to establish his own consultancy company within strategy, market research, and innovation management. Ulf joined Diamyd Medical in 2015 and has served as its CEO since 2016. He is also the board member of Sweden and Silicon Valley-based deep tech company, Mainly AI, and he has co-authored 16 peer-reviewed scientific articles during his time in academia and at Diamyd Medical. And we will also hear from Ulf Hannelius. Jonny Ludvigsson. So Jonny, also we will hear from Professor Jonny Ludvigsson, who has been researching diabetes for over 50 years since his first experiments in 1967, and he continues his research today. He is the honorary member of the European Association for the Study of Diabetes and the International Society for Pediatric and Adolescent Diabetes. He has received several awards, such as the inaugural ISPAD Prize, and in the 1990s, he initiated the ABIS birth cohort study, which follows 17,000 individuals to investigate the impact of environmental and genetic factors on the development of type 1 diabetes. To create resources for diabetes research, Professor Jonny Ludvigsson founded the Swedish Child Diabetes Foundation in 1989. To date, he has published more than 500 articles and participated in a large number of immune interventions with anti-CD3, TNF-alpha inhibition, and GAD65, one of the major autoantigens in type 1 diabetes and the active ingredient in the antigen-specific immunotherapy Diamyd. Professor Jonny Ludvigsson is the principal investigator of the precision medicine phase 3 clinical trial Diamyd 3, evaluating the effectiveness of preserving insulin production in adolescents and adults recently diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, carrying the genetic HLA-DR3-DQ2 haplotype. The trial involves the administration of Diamyd, GAD alum, directly into the lymph nodes. My apologies if I misspoke any of those things, but I'm really excited. Clearly, we know diabetes is a huge pandemic or epidemic in the world, and something we have to solve, and I'm really excited to hear from all 3 of you. So please take it away.
Thank you, Viveka, and I'll start off, and thank you for those, well, nice introductions. I was impressed even hearing about myself. Maybe I shouldn't be, but it's always nice to hear about someone else talking about you. I will start sharing my screen here. There we go, presentation mode. I hope it's in presentation mode now.
It is.
Yes, fantastic. Well, I'll keep this quite brief. We are 3 speakers. We have about half an hour, so I don't have many slides. But I want to just give an introduction to Diamyd Medical as a company and maybe touch upon the bridging the gap element, also why we are all here listening today. Me personally, just as an interesting story, I bridged the gap some years ago before joining the Diamyd by having the opportunity to actually go to Silicon Valley and spend 1 month in a startup company. And that was so inspiring that I jumped over from academia to the dark side, as you say, and started my own company. So that's actually one way of doing it, going from Sweden to Silicon Valley and then finding new inspiration. But Diamyd Medical, so we are a company focusing on diabetes and especially type 1 diabetes, which is the autoimmune form of the disease where the insulin producing cells are destroyed by the immune system. And we specifically focus on drug development and disease modifying therapies. So therapies that really try to change the disease at its core. So really not only taking care of the symptoms, but really you want to change the disease course and in the best case, long-term cure the disease. And that's the whole point of, or the vision of our company when Anders Möller, who will be sitting on the panel today, founded the company back in the days. And we have, I will briefly touch upon our flagship product, which is the antigen-specific immunotherapeutic Diamyd, where also Professor Ludvigsson will talk a bit more about the disease and also the ongoing phase 3 trial we have now. So autoimmune diabetes, type 1 diabetes, most people have heard about it. It was back in the days, you talked more about like it's a childhood onset diabetes, but today we know that as many adults as children actually get diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. So you can get it also when you are 80 years old, you can get diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. But it's the highest incidence is in the young teens. And as I mentioned, it's a disease where the immune system still for many like unknown reasons goes to attack on the insulin producing cells, and then you get too little insulin producing capacity and you get diagnosed and you end up on exogenous insulin therapy for the rest of your life. And it's a big, I mean, type 2 diabetes is the really big group of diabetes, but autoimmune diabetes, which consists of both type 1 and what's called also LADA, latent autoimmune diabetes in adults, is more than 10% of all individuals in the world who have diabetes have autoimmune, and it's up to 20%. So it's way over 50 million people in the world today have an autoimmune form of diabetes. And those are diseases that can't be really treated with the, let's say, traditional diabetes drugs that are very common in type 2 diabetes. And it's also, from a health economic perspective, a really big problem. And in the US alone, the disease costs society around 20 billion US. On a global scale, it's around closer to 100 billion US. So that's a lot of money. And it's also shown that a disease modifying therapy, so a therapy that can slow down the disease progression, would have a multi-billion-dollar impact every year in the US alone. So that's one way of looking at the importance, the unmet medical need, but really the potential to do something about this disease, both to treat the individuals, but to really also make society more sustainable from an economic perspective. And what we are developing is, we call it the antigen-specific immunotherapy Diamyd. It is a recombinant protein. So going back to the previous presentation, it's a large protein that is actually present in the body. It's expressed partly by the insulin-producing cells. What we want to do in a very simplified manner is that we want to present the same protein to the body and reprogram it so that the immune system realizes that that's nothing strange. I shouldn't be attacking this protein. And in this way, it would also stop then the attack on the insulin producing cells. And the really big thing, if you want to remember at least one thing of what I'm saying today, is we are working with what's called precision medicine that I think most people have heard about today, which I believe is and will be a really big part of the future of medicine. And what we are doing is that we are identifying our responder patients using a genetic test So we know which individuals that have a specific genetic variation have a high likelihood of responding to our therapeutic. And we have found this based on large-scale analysis, both retrospective and prospective, where we can show that around up to 40% of individuals with type 1 diabetes in Europe and US have the right genetics to respond to our therapeutic. And then we treat, and the point like I made is to stop the destruction of the insulin-producing cells, and this will then lead to that you have both a better glucose control and that you can prevent these both short and long-term complications of the disease, which are really driving these high health economic costs and also the shorter lifespans of individuals with the disease. And precision medicine is then really that you know whom you should be treating, when you should be treating this individual, and with what drug should you be treating it. And the really powerful message around precision medicine is that it's a much more sustainable way of doing medicine, because like traditional therapeutics, some only work in 20% of individuals. You treat 100%, but only 20% get the benefits, 80% get all the side effects. And obviously these 80% cannot be treated with anything else during that time as well. So that's really not a sustainable way of doing medicine, and it also drives huge economic costs when you treat on such a broad basis. So what we are doing, and what a lot of like the success stories in the oncology field has been, is really to find your patients, pre-screen them, understand who will benefit from your drug, and only treat these. That will be, from a pricing perspective, you can motivate your price better. Individuals know that they will most likely get the benefits, and in this way also society will benefit, since the other people can then be treated with something else that would most likely benefit them more. And now the really exciting thing is that we have the first ever precision medicine phase 3 trial in type 1 diabetes ongoing. So it's already ongoing in 8 European countries, up to around 50 clinics take part in this in Europe. And the plan is to start it in the US as well, where we will include around 10 clinics, a bit more as well. So that's also, and why US? Obviously, US is the biggest pharmaceutical market in the world, depending on the indication and the drug. Up to 80% of your income will come from the US. So it's very important to be there, regardless if you are a Swedish or a Finnish or a whatever, from where you are. US is really important from a commercial perspective. But obviously, it's a really big country, 350 million people. So there's a huge amount of patients as well that need new treatments. And we are also very excited that we have very recently partnered with JRF, which is the largest patient advocacy organization in the US and the largest financer of type 1 diabetes research in the world. And they have partnered with us for the phase 3 trial, which is very important and exciting for us, obviously having them on board as well. And again, one way of showing how a Swedish company can partner with a US strong organization to really drive this kind of research. And that was my last slide. And I will now hand over to Professor Ludvigsson, who will talk a bit more about the disease in itself and the unmet medical need and the importance of what we're doing here. So I will stop sharing. Please, Jonny.
Okay, thank you. Then I hope I can show my slides, and we have only a quarter left. Sorry, that is, I'll go from the beginning like that. Yeah, why and how, and I will just say a few words then about the disease, because this is the most common serious life-threatening disease among young people, children and adolescents, and it's very common also in adults in most Western countries. It's a very heavy treatment every day, and there are life-threatening acute complications and serious late complications and increased mortality. And as we have heard, no cure and so far, no prevention. And the incidence has increased continuously the last 40, 50 years in those countries where we have had registers. You know, I show you this slide as a rather modern slide from Sweden, which in fact, if one compares metabolic control, has the best metabolic control in patients in all countries. And still it was shown recently that if you get type 1 diabetes before the age of 10, you lose like 14 to 17 years in length of life. So it's extremely serious still with the modern treatment. And yeah, I just want you to get an impression for those of you who don't know anything about diabetes. Look here. This is the blood glucose fluctuating when you don't have so much own insulin secretion. Even with modern treatment, it is very difficult to keep blood glucose stable. If you have own insulin secretion, like this after an islet transplantation, you have that sort of stable blood glucose, which you, those of you who do not have diabetes, have. So it's an enormous difference, and it is shown in other studies. I took two slides from the most well-known complication study, the diabetes control and complication trial in United States in the early 90s. And that had the problem when you treated very actively, that those got serious hypoglycemia with unconsciousness and convulsions. The yellow bar you see here, but if you had some own insulin secretion, that played an enormous role, and you had much less of acute complications. And also, if you look upon the late complication, we take retinopathy in the eyes as one example. Those treated in the most intense way with some insulin secretion, not very much, you could see a much less risk of serious retinopathy. But there are many, many studies showing this. So it's extremely important. And we have worked then with Diamyd and GAD treatment for quite many years. We know this is a very safe type of treatment, and no serious adverse events, actually no adverse event at all, more or less related to the treatment. And this is just one slide showing from the last intralymphatic treatment we have had in the phase 2 trial with 109 patients. That is a clear, significant difference. The blue line, they do not lose their own insulin secretion at all as rapidly as those who got placebo. So this shows beautifully an effect in those patients, as Ulf pointed out, with the correct genetic background. As a lady of 3DQ2, which is about half of the population, or almost half at least, and then they should also recognize GAD as an antigen, so they are GAD positive. They have that sort of autoantibodies. And we were actually also able to see here beautifully that it has an effect. It's so strong, this effect on the own insulin secretion. So although all of these patients use modern techniques to get the best metabolic control, but we can still see a clear difference in glycemic index and in blood glucose, time in range, and so on. So the result is very promising, and that has led to now this phase 3 trial. The phase 2 had the same design, and this means that we screen the patients first, and then when we know that they can be included, we start with vitamin D if they have too low vitamin D concentration, and that they get both active group and a placebo group. And then after a month, we give, with 1 month apart, just 3 injections. This is a very simple, for the patient, tolerable treatment without any known adverse events in comparison with many other treatments which are coming, but with a lot of adverse events and serious risks. Here we have a very safe treatment, which is easily justified among not least children and adolescents, but also adults. So I say to my collaborators, when we discuss this, we have a good chance to contribute to a breakthrough in the treatment of type 1 diabetes. Instead of palliative treatment for 100 years now, we have a chance to both gradually prevent perhaps historical. And I end up, as the Crown Princess couldn't participate, I show you a picture. I gave them, I was invited to the wedding actually, and I gave them as a present before their wedding a course on type 1 diabetes. So they have both participated on the course. And no, it's an important disease, and the Crown Princess is very interested in that. That is my last slide. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that. That was wonderful. I don't know how one follows that picture though, but Karin Rosen, you will have to try.
Sounds like a great challenge. Okay, let me see if I can share here then. Hang on. All right, and I think I'm supposed to do Shift F5. Nope, that did not work. Can you see my slide?
We can see your slides.
But it's not in presentation mode. Okay, now I think it came up, right?
Perfect. Yep.
Okay,
perfect.
Good. Perfect. I'm just going to move the pictures here. All right. So first of all, thank you, Viveka, and thanks to the organizers and thanks to the participants. It's really a great honor to be here. My name is Karin Rosen, and in Swedish, Karin Rosen. So I'm also from the north, like Claes. I'm from Härnösand originally. You heard from Viveka, I spent a lot of time in the biotech industry. I'm an MD, PhD from Lund University. I also had the opportunity of going over to San Francisco and UCSF and do part of my medical training, as well as studying genetics at the Erasmus Hospital in Brussels, Belgium. And that was really the entrance for me into the biotech pharmaceutical industry. And what I'm going to, I'm changing gear. I'm going to go through this pretty swiftly, but I'm just going to try to share with you why I think it's so important, or why it is important for biotech companies to really win in the US market. And so I don't know why this is not moving forward. Okay. Sorry about this. Okay. All right. So what you really need, I do not know who's sitting in the audience, where you're sitting in Sweden or in the US, if you're from the pharma biotech industry or research or venture capital, whatever. But what's really important about the US market is that it's very vastly different from the Swedish market and the European market. And really, to be able to win in this market, you really need to make sure that you align any capabilities that you have to the emerging trends in this country. And so you have already heard probably, and you've heard great things now about what's going on in the biotech space or in cell therapy. And just to give you a little bit of perspective, we hear about human insulin. The first recombinant human insulin was developed in the mid-1970s, and it was approved in 1982. And that was actually a recombinant, E. coli that was used to reduce a human protein, and that made it possible to start treating patients with a more human insulin. But that's almost 50 years ago. And even if that was very revolutionary at the time, as you heard from Professor Ludvigsson, there's still, many, many challenges with this, especially for the type 1 diabetes, where you have, that the blood sugar levels keeps fluctuating so much, and it's hard to control. So what we have seen more recently, and this is very exciting, I think, on behalf of Diamyd, the recent trends are the major interest in identifying or develop new treatments that really get at the root cause of diabetes. And just recently, you could see a $2.9 billion acquisition of Prevention Bio by Sanofi. And this is really for primarily, they have several pipeline products, but it's really related to the FDA approved immunotherapy called SEALD to treat type 1 diabetes. Vertex Pharmaceuticals, it's another company. They're primarily known for developing drugs in the cystic fibrosis space. They've done exceptionally well. And they have also made 2 major acquisitions recently, both to acquire ViaCyte as well as Sema Therapeutics. And these are, ranging from $300 million to $1 billion. So these are big dollars that is spent in this space. Very more recently is Novo Nordisk acquisition as well of a biotech company in Canada. This is also, to be able to treat patients with cell therapy. And again, for type 1 diabetes. So the interest in this space has really emerged over the recent years. As you probably are aware also, with the recent Inflation Reduction Act from the Biden administration, we saw a demand from the US government for insulin producers to really lower the prices and put a cap on the cost for patients to be able to afford insulin. There's millions of patients suffering from diabetes in the United States that simply couldn't afford paying for their insulin. And this act allows to cap. So for each patient, they only have to pay $35 a month to be able to get their insulin that they need. So these are the current trends, particularly in the diabetes space. Other trends that I think is important to think about, whether you're a drug developer or you're a risk capitalist or you are an investor of some kind, is that when you develop drugs today, you cannot just use traditional endpoints to get your drugs approved by the Food and Drug Administration. A lot of you are probably a lot younger than myself sitting in the audience, and a lot of you are so savvy, you're a lot more interested in knowing what's in it for me. So when you look at scientific data, you really want to see potentially clinical endpoints that speaks your language, things that you can follow. And I think this is important if you want to conduct a big and large trial in the US, is really to come up also not only with the clinical trial endpoints that are going to give you the approval from the health authorities, but also endpoints that are meaningful to patients. This will help you speed up your enrollment, and also you will get a much faster market uptake because there's huge competitions about getting patients enrolled in clinical trials in this country. Other things that you need to think about is also the retention in trials, especially for longer clinical trials. You want to make sure that the patients who are enrolled, that you don't lose those patients. And also the same thing when it comes to the duration of the treatment. If you have patients that understand certain endpoints that they can follow themselves over time, then that may also help them remain on the therapy, because unfortunately, even with efficacious treatment, we know that a lot of patients unfortunately stop the treatment for various reasons. We also believe that when it comes to clinical trials, telemedicine so making it easier for patients to go into a center and fulfill all the clinical trials sort of questions is really also critical. I will also just briefly talk about patient journeys. I think it's hard for somebody sitting in Sweden and realizing what it's like to treat patients in the US and vice versa. Here in the US, a lot more community-based physicians are treating with specialized drugs, which is not the case in Europe and in Sweden, particularly where you have specialist centers like Professor Ludvigsson Center. So it's not going to be any physician in Sweden that can prescribe a drug that would cost $20,000, $30,000, $50,000 a year. That's not the case here in the US. You have a lot of community physicians that once the drug is approved can prescribe it. So you need to think about that as well when you conduct your clinical trials, and also when you disseminate your data. It's going to be much, much broader prescriber group here in the US. So how do you get the information to them? Key model. This is really critical as well to think about for any company who wants to get into the US. It's not only about designing your perfect clinical trial with the right endpoints and getting the right sites on board. It's also to think about how is this drug going to be paid for and reimbursed for. So already early on, in Sweden, you have pretty much one single payer model, and it's Läkemedelsförmånsverket. But in the US, you have thousands of payers. So what does that mean? So one company is called United Health. That's one insurance company. They have 49.5 million members. That means that it's really relevant even before you get your drug approved or you present your phase 3 data to the FDA, is to have conversations with these payer groups to say, what are the requirements that you are going to put up for us to be able to get this drug reimbursed? You've had that conversation, you have that alignment, and that will also impact what you put into your clinical trials so that you can really assure yourself and also potential investors that not only will you get this drug approved, but it will actually get reimbursed. And that is going to be critical for when you have your conversations with different payers and investors. So I'm going to swift gear here and just talk then about why it's important to focus on the value proposition. What I mean by that is that we're looking at what is the effect size this drug can do, not only for the patient to potentially lower blood sugar level, if that it is, or reduce asthma exacerbations or treat cancers, but it's really to also be able to generate data. How is this going to help payers save money longer term? So if you can demonstrate that you can reduce hospitalizations, for example, or you can reduce emergency room visits, this is critical for any payer because those are the big cost items for these patients when they have complications and end up in the ER, and they cost, $10,000, $20,000 a day to stay in the hospital. And if you can demonstrate that you could reduce that, then that's obviously a much greater chance for you to be able to persuade the payers to reimburse for this drug. On another note, it's also important as a company when you develop your drugs to think about what is the kind of price I can set for this product, because that's going to you obviously not only make a profit that you intend to reinvest in new R&D. And if you look at, I mentioned to you Prevention Bio and their product, that has been set, the price is about $200,000, per patient to give this treatment. And that's currently being reimbursed. And so in order to be able to get payers to pay for such treatment, you would really need to have extensive, robust data to be able to demonstrate that you actually can make savings somewhere. So I'm mentioning this, and this is a very high level presentation, but all of these things are really important to think about when you are developing your product, and also not only to think about generating the absolute best data, but also how you will be able to get this drug approved, and also you will have the uptake that you hope for. So those were the things I was just going to go through today, and I think we're out of time, right? Or where are we in terms of time, Viveka?
We are actually pretty good. We have until 9:20 when we're going to hear from the next speaker. So I think we could take some questions if somebody has it. We've been doing really well, and I'm looking forward to really robust and interesting conversation. And I really appreciate that you were giving some good advice also for newcomers to the U.S. market and what they should be focusing on, including the increased focus on the value proposition. So I really appreciate you being generous with this information, and all of you, really terrific presentation on what can be done. So let's see here. I have a question for you, Dr. Rosen. First of all, thank you for the presentation. And the question is, what role does primary care providers in the US play? And how important is it to educate the primary care providers on insurance coverage, drug safety, et cetera, and help them educate their patients appropriately? And then I would just say for the Swedish audience, maybe to explain the term primary care provider.
Yeah, so primary care providers pretty much like the doctors that will be working at a vårdcentral, so not specialists working at an academic center. And so, and my point being here is that, first of all, when you conduct your clinical trial, like Diamyd is doing, you have selected, critical centers that are thought leaders, and that's really critical for your clinical trial. However, when it comes to the uptake, a lot of, of these sort of more primary care providers, they will not be the pioneers. They're not going to be the ones starting to do this unless they can hear from, first of all, the key opinion leaders and the thought leaders. But their thought leaders may not only be the absolute experts in the US, they may actually be your regional expert, for example. They go to a regional congress or conference in their state. So if they feel comfortable that somebody there has been treating patients and feel comfortable with the safety, efficacy, safety profile, then they may feel that compelled to prescribe the drug. I would not say that if you're a smaller company that should be your first thought, that you need to educate all of them, but you need to think about it. And what I mean by that, it's not sufficient to go to one major conference or publish your results in one top tier scientific journal. These physicians in the US do not go to those conferences. They do not read those proceeds, and they certainly do not prescribe to these scientific journals. So you really need to re-educate and think about how do you get down to a more regional level. But that's not that I'm saying that that's your first step, but you need to think about it. And I'll give you another example when it comes to asthma. In Europe, you may have about 30 to 40 key opinion leaders in a country. Here you will have 3,000. So the magnitude is very different.
Thank you for that. That was very, very helpful. Thank you so much. And is it okay for participants to email you if they have questions
Absolutely.
later on? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, that is so great. Well, it was wonderful hearing from Diamyd, and we look forward to see where the company goes in the future. And thank you for helping solve a really big problem in the world. So thank you. It was fantastic. Yeah.